All right, guys, welcome to Question of Strength. Sorry for being at a different time this week. In Quebec, we do have somewhat of a, let's say, school situation, or it's like the whole government employee situation, rather. They are on strike, so we don't have any schools. We have to take care of the kids, we have to plan activities, and so on and so forth. Well, that's life. So I'm here a bit later. I'm here. If you have any questions, just type them in the chat section on your right. And again, the more questions you have, the more interesting this is going to get. Because I think that a large part of what I'm doing is trying to help people out with their own training. So everybody who has a question, hopefully my answer will help them uh, do better with their work and probably help other people who will either be listening today or who will listen in the future. And again, all of these questions can actually be turned into an article on Testosterone Nation or tnation.com. So you can actually see the best questions being turned into a visual article as well as some added notes to make it more easily understandable. Now, just like every week, what I want to start with is a topic that either interests me, some things I find out, something I believe that needs more information. So this week, I want to readdress the concept or the theory, rather, of effective reps, and more importantly, how it basically explains that, like, my biggest belief, my number one belief when it comes to people's training, and the main reason why they fail to get the gains that they are trying to accomplish is simply due to the fact that they are not training with a high level of effort that is sufficient to trigger those gains. So basically, they're just not training hard enough. And there are two new, well, not new, but fairly recent studies that, when put into context and linked together, really illustrate that. So I'm going to start with the findings of these two studies and what it means. Then I will readdress the concept, the theory of effective reps, and what I think about it and what you can take from it when it comes to programming your own training. So for the first study I want to mention is by Barbosa Neto, which was published in 2021. Basically, what they did is they asked a group of subjects, weight training subjects, what weight would they use if they were asked to do a set of 10 reps or a hard set of 10 reps? What weight would you select? So all the subjects picked a weight that they would use for a hard set of 10 reps, a work set of 10 reps, with the goal, obviously, of increasing muscle mass. And then what they did was they had all these subjects perform a set with their selected weight under supervision until we reach muscle failure. And that's where the interesting finding comes into play, is that all of the subjects did between 6 and 9 more repetitions than the 10 they were asked to perform or to select the weight for. So basically, let's say that you think, well, how much weight would you use for a hard set of 10 reps? I'm going to pick 120, and you actually end up doing 18 reps with that until you hit failure. So the point is that most people, when they are selecting their weight, are likely uh, grossly undershooting their level of effort, meaning that they are leaving a lot more reps in the tank than they believe they're actually doing. And this is important because of the second subject, the second study I want to mention, a study by Han and Al, which was published in 2018. And what they found out was, even if you do a high volume of sets, if you leave 4 reps in reserve on all those sets, even with a high volume, you get almost no muscle growth. Okay. And that is important because if you take a look at the first study, most people leave at least 6 reps in the tank. Now, the 6 to 9 reps in the tank might be an overshoot, might be a rare case, but certainly it does illustrate that people do leave, in general, a lot more reps in reserve than they are believed they are leaving in reserve. And from my own observation, actually, the 6 reps short of failure is kind of like what I'm seeing in real life. And certainly, the vast majority of people in the gym are leaving at least 4 reps in reserve on their work sets. And the second study looked at 4 reps in reserve roughly. And even with a high volume of stats, you just don't get much muscle growth from that. So it does illustrate my core belief that the reason why most people fail to build muscle from their training is simply not, it's not because they have the wrong program or the wrong supplementation or the wrong exercises. It's simply a lack of effort. Knowingly or not, they are leaving too many reps in reserve. Now, this goes back to the theory of effective reps. So let me address this theory. And again, I want to emphasize that it's just that. It's a theory. And I think that it's the most up-to-date, most modern way of looking at what can stimulate muscle growth, but it might be proven wrong in the future. So we need to keep that in mind. But that having been said, I think there's a lot of good things about that theory. And the theory of effective reps is that basically for a rep to be productive when it comes to stimulating muscle growth, it does need first to recruit the fast twitch fibers because they have the highest growth potential. This is especially important for natural lifters because, as I pointed out in a previous question of strength, one of the effect or benefits of steroid is that they are actually amplifying the anabolic responsiveness of the slow twitch fibers, which is why a lot of people can gain a lot of muscle even if they don't push their sets to failure if they do lots of sets on steroids. Because now they might not get to the fast twitch fibers because they're not pushing their sets hard enough. Okay, but that likely doesn't matter because the steroids make the slow twitch fibers just as responsive to hypertrophy than the fast twitch fibers, which is not the case in natural lifters. So a natural lifter needs to recruit the fast twitch fibers and then impose a high level of tension on those fibers. So without going into all the details, those two conditions to be met, you need to reach a point in your set where the repetitions start to get hard. The moment they start to get hard, meaning that even if you're trying to push with all you have, you just cannot accelerate the weight for the life of it. It feels hard. I mean, you've all done that, right? You do a set, and there will always be that one rep where something changes. It's like you go from a fairly easy rep to, oh, dude, that's much harder, right? That's when the set actually starts to count. All the reps from that point on are what we would call effective reps. Now, in a normal set, uh, that would be the last 4 to 6 repetitions. Let's average it out at 5. Okay. So if you go to failure, the last 5 reps before you hit failure will have a significant impact on muscle growth. And what you want is to accumulate enough of those effective reps to trigger growth. That's the first thing. Now, that's fairly simple concept to understand. And I think that's the main reason why people really love that concept because, well, they can more easily measure it. People love when they can measure something. I need 25 effective reps. Okay, so that's easy to understand. And if you go to failure or one rep short of failure, it's pretty easy to calculate roughly how many effective reps you're getting. However, that's not as simple as it seems. It never is. It's popular on social media and even on the internet. It's very popular to simplify everything because nowadays people don't want to research all the complexities. They just want the broad answer that makes them feel that like they understand something, even though they might not understand it completely. So it never is as simple as it sounds, but that's a pretty good start. Now, there are some elements that make the whole effective reps theory a bit more complex than it is. The first one is that in that range of effective reps, in the last 5 reps before you hit failure or effective reps. Well, even in that continuum, not all reps are as effective. So, for example, the last 5 reps before failure will be effective reps, but all those 5 reps do not have the same level of effectiveness. The closer a rep is to failure, the more effective there is, because essentially you're going to have more tension because of the fatigue slows you down. So slowing the movement down means that you need to produce more effort to keep moving the weight up, creating more tension. So that makes the repetition more effective at stimulating growth. So even though the 5th rep before failure is an effective rep, it's probably 2 or 3 times less effective than the last rep before you hit failure. So that's also something you need to consider. So for example, if I if I leave 2 reps in the tank, it's not just 2 reps less effective than if you do go to five. It might be you might require three times as many sets if you leave three reps in the tank or two reps in the tank, rather, and if you go to failure. So it's almost exponential. Okay. So basically, the more reps you leave in the tank, the harder it is to compensate with volume. Okay, because it's not just a matter of, well, I'm two reps short of failure, so I'll just do one more set and I'm going to fill up my reps. That doesn't work like that, because if you go to failure, that set is likely three times as effective as having two reps short of failure. So it builds up really quickly as far as how much volume you need to compensate for the lack of effort in your set. Furthermore, even more complex than that, the first work set always leads to better gains than the other sets. Okay. So, yes, adding sets, which will add effective reps, will increase the growth stimulus. However, not all these sets carry the same power of stimulating hypertrophy. The first set is a lot more effective than the others. For example, Chris Beardsley mentions that he's the pioneer of the effective reps theory. He mentioned that if you do six sets, for example, the first work set, close to failure or to failure, will be as effective by itself as the next five sets. So as you can see, it's a lot more complex than it is, because five effective reps done on the sixth set are less effective than the sets on the first set. So basically, what it means is, first, don't overcomplicate things, even though it sounds complex. But if you do your push them hard, maybe not always to failure, but certainly like one rep short of failure, and adding more sets and more sets and more sets from strictly a hypertrophy standpoint has a very strong diminishing return. Okay, so personally, I think that doing fewer sets more often, but higher frequency, could have benefits, but that's something for a different video. All right, already some questions. I still want to get to the question. I want to briefly mention again some stuff I've been doing. As you might know, if you've been these Q&As before, I reoriented my training more towards the performance side of things, which is really my first love when you think about it. Um, I started out training for football. Then I switched after football to Olympic weightlifting. Then I tried briefly to compete in bobsleigh. And the athletes I trained were always in that strength and power continuum. So I would say that the first half of my training career as a coach and as an athlete was mostly for power, speed, explosiveness, and strength. Okay? And even after that, strength as was always on my first priority, much more important to me than muscle mass. I would say that to me, the most important things are uh, performance, so that anything that I need to perform at a high level, then leanness is second, and muscle mass would be third. Right. So my training now is geared more and more toward uh, being like, okay, that's gonna sound like super kitsch, but I'd like to feel like a fighting machine. I understand that my goal is not to go on the street and fight with people. That's what I'm saying. But like feeling like that kind of warrior, the person who could defend his family if needed, or get into a brawl. So that's the kind of physique I want. Like imagine like a mixed martial artist, slightly bigger. So I want power, I want speed, I want strength, and I want fighting capacity. So in that regard, I started doing martial art classes 3 days a week, boxing class 1 day a week, and also gradually gearing more of my training toward that. So what that means is that I do have two main types of workouts. The first one is a strength workout using very few exercises. I'm shooting for training economy, getting the overall result with the least amount of not just work, but variation. I just want to be really good at a few things that cover pretty much the whole body. So I started out doing snatch grip high pulls from the blocks, weighted dips, Zercher squats, and barbell curls. I feel that this gives me everything I need from a muscular development or strength and power standpoint. What I changed this week, and this has been the big thing, and I'm super happy about that. I switched snatch with high pulls from blocks to the power snatches, which is by far my favorite lift. And I believe that for strictly athletic improvement, it's the best movement you can do. The reason why I'm able to do it again is because I managed to improve my shoulder mobility, which was my limiting factor. I couldn't like catch the bar behind me like I need to do on snatches and couldn't reach that externally rotated position. And what really helped me, I think, was doing a lot of shoulder. So basically, I'm using a plate that I'm holding here, and I'm around my head like this, 10 reps per side. I'm doing that at the beginning of every single workout. So that's 6 days a week for me. I'm also doing lots of inertial wave movement with shoulders, which are imagine like a big, a thick elastic band, and doing kind of battle rope exercises with it that seem to really loosen up my shoulder. I actually don't do mobility work yet. My shoulder mobility has improved enough to do snatches, which is I'm super happy about that. Then the second type of workout I'm doing is more conditioning workout, in which I include loaded carries and metabolic exercises like kibi swings, like sledgehammer striking, stuff like that. These workouts are much less structured than the strength workout. I'm also starting doing more technical stuff, technical workout, which means more rotational exercises with kibis, with bands, with straps, stuff like that. Supersetted or complex with heavy bag striking. That's what I've been doing. And oddly enough, even though I'm actually not trying to build muscle, my body weight has crept up a bit, and I'm not any fatter. And I notice more size in the traps and biceps. The biceps, I attribute that because I'm not beside the barbell curl. What I'm doing for biceps was when I'm doing the resistance band exercises. I do lots of boxing drills, so like, just to work on keeping my guard up. And because the bands are pulling forward, there's a lot of tension in my biceps, and I do this warm up session every day before my workouts, where I would do, let's say, uh, 30 seconds of uh, the Russian curl like this with a band, then 30 seconds of bob and weave with that still very strong contraction in the bicep, then 30 seconds of jabs while holding that side again with a row, then 30 seconds of cross, again, that contracting the biceps at the opposite biceps. Then I would do backwards, backwards, forward, and again, all of that as a static isometric bicep contraction. So essentially, during that warm up, the biceps are under contraction for 2 minutes and a half. And I do attribute the change to my biceps, especially brachialis, which has been never a dominant muscle in me. Now I can actually see that's been a big thing. And that's the only I can see that makes a difference. All right, guys, let's get to your questions. Thank you for typing some already. The more we get, the better it is. Understanding that because of the family situation I have today, I might have to cut it short, but I'm going to try to answer all those questions as much as I can. Hey, coach, zone two cardio. Your thoughts? Should this be included in your training in our training for those of us hypertrophy focused? Will this empower thing? Yes, I absolutely believe in zone two cardio, especially if you don't just want to be muscular, but also muscular and lean. And lean, I believe that zone two cardio done at the proper dose will have a enhancing effect on your physique. First, by obviously contributing to getting you leaner, but it's also my belief that the more effective your cardiovascular system is, the more body will allow you to add muscle mass. Think about it this way: the muscle tissue is a live tissue. It needs blood flow. It needs a support system. It needs oxygen. And that support system is mostly the cardiac and vascular systems that both deliver the nutrients to the muscles as well as pump the blood oxygen to the muscles and get rid of the metabolites produced by that muscle mass. So the larger the muscle you have, the harder the cardiovascular system needs to work just to maintain and support that muscle mass. And I believe that if you reach a point where your muscle mass puts too much strain on your cardiovascular system, the body will simply not allow you to build more muscle because, from a survival standpoint, that would be really dumb for your body to do that. So I believe that having a more effective cardiovascular system in the long run will actually help you build more muscle tissue. Now you will always point out, well, Christian, what about endurance athletes? I mean, they do lots of zone two cardio and other zones, of course, but they do a lot of work in their zone in the second zone, and they are not muscular. And even studies showing that those endurance athletes actually have lower testosterone levels. And I agree with that 100%. Excessive or, okay, there's a difference between doing some zone to cardio to get in better physical health, a better conditioning, losing some fat, and doing cardio improve cardiovascular or endurance performance in the sense of competing in an endurance event. Now, if you are a long distance runner, for example, you might accumulate what 40, 60, 70 miles per week easily, sometimes more, and very routinely doing at least 10 to 15 miles per day. Okay. At an intensity level that might be at the top of zone two or at the beginning of zone three, which is completely different than somebody doing 30 or 45 minutes of zone two cardio at the beginning or the middle of the zone. Everything is in the dosage of things. Cardio itself, zone two cardio or other zones, is not going to be detrimental to muscle growth. It's the higher amount than necessary, or the amount necessary for performance, but not necessary for what we seek as people who are more focused on muscularity and leanness, for example. But certainly, I do believe that getting more cardiovascularly fit is something that most people should shoot for, especially those trying to maximize hypertrophy. And I think that it's neglected. Now, at first, if you go from zero cardio at all to doing even 30 minutes 3 times a week, you might notice that you are smaller. Um, that's not a loss of muscle mass. It's probably because you are more depleted than usual and maybe dehydrated or maybe you lose muscle glycogen because when you first start doing a cardiovascular exercise, it represents stress to your body. Any training is a stress to your body, but it's an unusual stress. It's something you're not used to doing. But the more you do it, the more efficient you become, the less stressful that it becomes. And now you're going to reap the benefits without the visual effect. Okay? And the visual effects, like you're going to feel flatter and smaller. These are not muscle loss. It's just maybe a decrease in muscle tone, maybe a decrease in glycogen storage. But it's not going to be a decrease in muscle mass. So I absolutely believe that zone two cardio at around 30 to 45 minutes, 3, even 5 times a week is very beneficial, even if you're trying to build muscle. Obviously, the one thing you need to consider is if you are in a muscle gaining phase, okay, you might need to eat a bit more to compensate for the calories you are using to fuel your zone to cardio. Okay, you might be burning, let's say, 400, 500 calories. So if you don't increase your calories, you might find yourself now in the deficit rather than the slight surplus, which will make muscle growth harder. See what I mean? Uh, so that's one thing you need to consider. All right. Hi, coach. When using protocols such as muscle rounds, do you hang in a stretch position between rounds? No, you're not. Or weight down for 10 seconds? Well, you put the weight down. And I fully understand the benefit of putting tension on the muscle tissue while it's in its lengthened state. Okay. But here, the goal of muscle rounds or other similar methods, and I'm going to explain what a muscle round is, and I'm going to give you equivalencies or training methods using a similar principle so that people can understand what we are talking about. Muscle round is something that was first coined by a guy named Leo Costa in a program called the Bulgarian Burst or Big Beyond Belief program. It had like 5 different names because every year it would put out a new one, which was just a rehash of the previous version. And he would use muscle rounds. And it kind of got revived by Dr. Scott Stevenson, who started including muscle rounds in his fortitude training program. But it actually predates fortitude training by probably 20 years. I actually remember when I was still in college, so like I was 21, I was doing a muscle rounds because I bought the Big Beyond Belief program. And it doesn't change. It's micro, one work set is 6 micro sets of 4 reps. So essentially, you're doing 24 repetitions and you are using a load you would normally get 12 reps with. Okay. And the reason why you can do double the number of reps you could normally use with a weight is because you are resting between packs of 4 reps. Okay. You do 4 reps, rest, 4 reps, rest, 4 reps, resting probably 15 to 20 seconds. Uh, Sometimes more depending on the program you're on. But the point is, you're resting between packs of 4 reps to allow you to get 24 reps with what you would normally 12 reps. Okay. Now, here comes the question. So if you are using an exercise in which you can keep tension on the muscle while it's in state, the muscle is not recovering between those micro steps. So it becomes possible to get 24 reps with a load you would do 12 reps. Okay? So it kind of defeats the purpose of the whole muscle round thing. Now you could use a very lightweight. So you're going to be using a weight you could do for 20 and get you 24 reps, but then you're underloading compared to what muscle rounds are designed to do. And if you are at exercises where there is no tension in lengthened state, your lateral raise, so you're resting your lateral raise while being standing up, you probably won't fatigue as much, but then again, there is no tension in that position on that exercise. So it's either you are pausing in a lengthened state that doesn't have any tension, so it does not produce any more hypertrophy, or you are pausing in a lengthened state when the muscle are still under tension, which prevents you from getting those 24 reps. Okay, so if you're doing a method like muscle rounds, like myo reps, like clusters, like rest pause, the rest period is just that. It's a rest period. The goal is to replenish the ATP, which is the fuel the muscle used to contract, and partially get rid of the metabolites that accumulate in the muscle. We're talking about hydrogen ions, about lactate. So these would actually change the pH of the muscle, making it harder to contract or contract. So if you take a short break every 4 reps or whatever scheme you're using, then you're gonna be able to replenish some ATP, so you're gonna have more fuel for intense muscle contraction, and you also get rid of some metabolites that would prevent muscle contraction. And that's why you can get 24 reps with a load you could get 12 reps with. So yes, the rest period must be complete rest. Also regarding muscle rounds, what are your thoughts on using compounds as steady rows or keep strictly on isolation? No, you can use it on any exercise. Uh, Obviously, the bigger compound movement comes at a higher cost. Uh, to me, that does not impact the doability of the muscle ramp or clusters for that matter, or rest pause for that matter, which use similar principle, or myo reps, which use a similar principle. Only one caveat I would give you is that using an exercise where you need to rack and unrack the weight might make the method less effective. Why? Because unracking the weight, like walking back on the squat, for example, and re-racking it, takes some energy, which may prevent you from getting as many reps as you could, okay? Especially on something like a squat, but also the bench press. Furthermore, every time you unrack the bar, there's a risk that you might not be able to get into that tight position on bench press, especially. Uh, so personally, I think that muscle rounds, myo reps, rest pause, clusters can be used with any exercise, but understand that if you have to unrack and rack the bar, especially if you have to walk back with the weight or set into a very specific position, tight position, there's a very real possibility that your performance will actually drop, making the method less effective. So, if anything, I would probably stay away exercises where you need to, like, unracking or getting the weight ready takes some energy. Another example would be dumbbell bench press or dumbbell incline press, where you do your reps, you lower them back down every time, and you have to bring them back up. That's a lot of fuel. That's a lot of energy, a nervous energy drain, and that will probably limit the performance. I will probably stay away from those exercises, not because they're compound movements, but because getting the weight into position uh, takes too much out of you and would like to make the method less effective. There's also the fact with dumbbells, for example, that bringing the weight down is more hazardous, especially when you're tired. So if you have to bring them back down 6 times per set, especially at the end when you're really tired, could increase the risk of injury. There's no reason not to be able to do that on compound movements. It's really the getting the weight in place requiring energy that I'm afraid of. The one thing I want to mention is that if I'm using muscle rounds, like typically you only do one set anyway, but certainly I would not do more than one set of myo reps or muscle rounds when using more compound movements. Whereas on isolation movement, you might be able to do two, maybe three in some cases. Who are you following? Books, social media, person you think are worth other following, and what you're appreciating about their info specifically. Honestly, I'm not someone who follows stuff. I kind of addressed that in the past. Um, if okay, I do quote unquote follow guys who post material that I find useful. For example, right now I'm exploring boxing specific or striking specific exercise. The people who are posting about that, they appear on my feed. I will tend to follow them, but I would be hard pressed to give you their names because I don't actually. I like that person. I just look at the exercise. If it's good, I'm going to save it. And I'm going to follow the person just in case he posts something useful again. But I'm not the kind of guy saying, "Okay, I'm going to follow that guy because I like what he's saying." That's not really me. As far as following people in person, again, I'm in a position where I'm lucky enough to be in a position where I can reach out to pretty much anybody in the field and just talk shop. So if I want, for example, if I want to ask Paul Carter about the most recent information about effort-based training, uh, I'm just going to call Paul. I mean, we're good friends. Same thing with pretty much anybody. If I want to ask someone about performance training, I'm just going to hit them up because I'm in the position where I can actually do that. So I don't need to follow people. I'm not, so, and as far as books, and I'm ashamed to say that, I have not read a training book in a while. I just don't have time anymore. And it's not going to, I don't want to sound arrogant, but I'm not going to learn that much new things in regard to strength training anymore. I mean, I've been doing this for 30 years. I've written like 6 books on training. I've pretty much experimented with every single method in existence. The only thing I might learn is how to combine various methods, how to dose intensities and volume intensity. But I'm not going to buy a book for that. Okay? And again, that's also I'm really the wrong person to ask about who you should. I look like Vip, I sound like GSP, of course. Actually, I like to have both of these guys' bank accounts. By the way, guys, even though I know it's Thanksgiving, don't hesitate to post more questions because I have only one more question left. So hopefully you guys get a bit more so we can make this a more worthwhile episode. Otherwise, I'm just going to talk about uh, life in general and maybe sing in French, which will get you pretty much scared to death and make you want to end life. Anyway, one last question from me, Coach. I'd like abs, but without adding an eating disorder. What's an exercise-based approach while I still lose body fat? Well, that's a good question, and I'm gonna say that I'm in the same situation. Um, although I'm lucky enough that my abs are so dominant that even at 15% body fat, I still have abs. I look like a fat pig, but a fat pig with abs. That's it is what it is. Um, but I'm at a point where I don't want to go on a crazy diet anymore, just because it makes me feel like crap. And I've done it a lot of times. I mean, every single photo shoot I've done, every single vacation I've done in the past, or competition or whatever, I'm actually very, very good at following an extremely strict lifestyle. Uh, but it's not worth it to me anymore. I still want the leanness, and I'm pretty much there. I mean, this past week, I actually increased my body weight a bit too much, but I'm still like close to photo shoot lean, and I'm doing that without really stopping to eat what I like to eat. So obviously, to lose fat, you still need to be in a calorie deficit. Okay, that's a given. That's not the only factor involved in fat loss, but it's probably the main one. Okay. Now, caloric deficit is misunderstood. Caloric deficit, most people equate that with eating less, and that's really only half of the equation. Okay, caloric deficit simply means that the calories in are lower than the calories out. Okay. So basically, you are ingesting less calories than you are using on a daily basis. And the amount of calories you're using depends on three main factors. Well, four if you include metabolic rate. So the first one would be the basal metabolic rate, the BMR. That accounts for 50 to 70% of your energy expenditure. Uh, Second would be the NEAT, or the non-exercise physical activity thermogenesis. So how much fuel or calories you're burning from moving. So it can be and moving, but it is not training. So it could be just the amount of walking you do every day. It could be doing chores. Basically, the more you are using your body to move in a non-stressful way, then you also have the exercise uh, activity thermogenesis, so the amount of training you're doing, which also uses calories. And then you have the thermic effect of food. When you're eating, you are actually burning calories to digest and absorb all that food. Okay, so basically, what a recent study found was that if the caloric deficit is created more by increasing physical activity than by decreasing food, okay, you have less negative effects from the fat loss process, meaning that you have less metabolic adaptation, slowing down of your metabolic rate, getting lazier, stuff like that. You have less behavioral changes. For example, someone who cuts food a lot, after a few weeks, will tend to become lazy. They subconsciously move a lot less, conserve energy. Okay, they will just slightly turn down their intensity when training to spend less energy. Behavioral changes that might actually decrease in how many calories they're burning every day, making fat loss harder, because the more deprived of food your body is, the more it will look for different strategies to make you use less fuel. Okay. There's also metabolic adaptation, so decrease in metabolic rate that comes with food reduction, and there are other elements like getting more cravings, decrease in leptin, which will make you crave more food. So that's the study found that the more you reduce food to achieve a caloric deficit, the more likely you have to have negative impact on top of feeling like crap, drop in libido, and so on and so forth. Furthermore, the more you have to reduce food to create a deficit, the more likely you are to rebound up after your weight loss. The more likely you are to regain weight pretty quickly. And I've experienced that myself. In the past, when I would get into photo shoot shape, uh, mostly through pretty aggressive caloric restriction, pretty aggressive carbs restriction, I would always bounce back way up. Even though I'm a coach, I've been helping people lose weight and get in great shape forever. I know what to do to try to maintain that degree of leanness, but every time it was achieved through a dramatic decrease in food, my body always won over me, and I always ended up regaining the weight within a month and a half, roughly. Okay. Now I'm using a different approach. I'm moving a whole lot more. Okay, moving quite a bit. And what I notice is that I'm able to achieve a very lean condition. I wouldn't say like to get into photo shoot shape, which means like 8% or less body fat, like veins on my abs and stuff like that. I would probably need to do 3 to 4 weeks at a more aggressive caloric restriction. But to get to the point I'm at right now, which is I'm full abs, I'm very muscular, I gotta have good muscle separation. I can actually achieve that just by moving more and being somewhat mindful of what I'm eating, meaning that I would say that 90% of the food I'm eating is unprocessed food. So I do eat a lot of animal products. I'm a big shellfish fan. That's not because it's any better, but I just like the taste. I do have lots of scampi's, lots of even lobster tails. You have a taste for that. But I'm also eating chicken, lots of meat, and some eggs and stuff like that. And I'm not necessarily counting how much, but as long as it's that, it normally I'm doing pretty well because the density of calories is pretty low on these foods. And if I want carbs, I just have a lot more fruits and lots of blueberries, lots of blackberries. If I have that sweet craving, I'm going to have some grapes. I also have some watermelon. And I find that if I stick to those unprocessed foods, even if I eat to my filling and move a lot, I get lean. So that would be my first recommendation. Maybe just look at the food choices you're making. But from an activity standpoint, first, I'm moving a lot more, and I believe that the more you move, the more you can keep food in. That's the main goal. Okay, I'm not trying to. A lot of people combine very low calories or very significant decrease in food with a very high increase in activity. Okay, they figure, well, I'm gonna eat a lot less, and I create I'm gonna be in a like in a thousand calories deficit per day just with food. Then I'm gonna add an extra 1,000 calories expenditure from to movement. I'm gonna lose like 5 pounds a week. Yeah, but you're gonna also get all the negative sides that come from excessive dieting and more. Okay, you're gonna feel tired all the time. You're gonna have metabolic adaptation. You're gonna be lazy. It's not sustainable. Okay, the goal of moving more during a fat loss process is to be able to be in a deficit, so losing fat, weight, without having to reduce food as much. Okay, let's say you're shooting for a 500 calories deficit per day. Okay, you can do that either by eating 500 calories less or by moving 500 calories more. In which case, you can eat the same amount of food you were eating. If you're increasing energy expenditure by 1,000, you can actually eat more and still lose fat. See what I mean? To me, that's the goal of moving more. It's still be able to be in a deficit without having to reduce food. Food is not just energy, it gives you nutrients, it helps you control hormones and stuff like that. So the more you decrease food, the more likely you are to have a harder time building muscle, recovering from training, supporting the nervous system, supporting the immune system, and not just going to feel like crap all the time. Okay, I'm going to give you an example of my schedule. I don't expect you to be able to do that because I used to be someone who spent 60 hours a week training people in the gym. Okay? But now my career is mostly as an educator. I don't want to call myself an influencer because I'm not educating people mostly through social media, even though I'm there. It's mostly through seminars in person, webinars. By the way, I do have an online webinar coming up with Ali Gilbert on natural versus enhanced trainings. You can go on my Instagram for more information about that. I also produce online courses. I write articles for T Nation. I have my online forum on T Nation. So basically, most of my job, I also have online coaching, of course. All of that is done in the comfort of my home. So it's very easy for me to include many bouts of physical activity. I don't expect you to be able to do what I'm doing, but it's just to illustrate the concept of moving more. And I'm going to give you some tips after. Okay, so first, when I wake up in the morning, I actually started doing that this week. Uh, the first thing I do upon waking up is I'm going to be doing my activation routine. We call it that. So essentially, I start with 5 minutes of cardio. I do have a treadmill. I also have an assault bike, so I alternate. So 5 minutes of that, then I will do my warm up exercises. I briefly mentioned them earlier. So it's like the halo with a plate, like 10 reps per side. I have my resistance band boxing drills, like bobbing, weaving, hitting, Russian curl. So basically, it's a circuit with the band that lasts 2 minutes and a half non-stop. Okay, And with the shoulder halos, that's about 30 seconds. That's give me 3 minutes of work. So we are at 8 minutes. Then I go back to my cardio and do 5 more minutes of cardio, then get back to my warm up routine. So that's my routine for the morning. That's roughly 15, 16 minutes. And then I have my first meal. Okay? Then I have my training session is going to be roughly at 9. Once the kids are at school, at daycare, so it's either a strength workout or a conditioning workout. It depends on the day. I normally go back and forth between strength and conditioning. And in the afternoon, I will have a striking technical session. So I'll do, let's say, 20 minutes roughly of boxing, like hitting the heavy bag. I will normally do rounds of a minute and a half, and I give myself a target. For the first round, I'll be just only jabs, and it's going to be jabs and cross, and it's going to be hooks, and it's going to be combination. And I do normally like 5 to 6 rounds of that. So that's like 15, 20 minutes. And 3 days a week, I have either martial arts or boxing classes. On top of that, I walk as much as possible. I do shoot for 10,000 steps per day. So I go to a grocery store every single day. I only buy the food I'm going to eat that day. So I have to go to the grocery store every day. It's a 20 minutes walk, so it's 40 minutes back and forth. So that counts for roughly 4,000 steps. And I walk my dogs every day for about 30 minutes. And every time I go pick up my kids at the bus stop, I leave, let's say, the bus stop is literally like 5 minutes away from me, but I will leave 30 minutes before. So I walk for 30 minutes before getting to the bus stop. So that builds up easily to 10,000 steps on top of the physical activity I'm doing. So that's a lot. That's a lot, but it actually allows me to keep eating 400 grams of carbs and not limit my per day and not limit myself and still losing body fat. The cool thing with that is that now, like for example, for the past 2 weeks, my body weight has been pretty much stable, even though I'm looking a bit more defined. So I'm still losing some fat, but maybe building some muscle, but it's not that significant. Okay, so that's why this week I added the morning routine. The 15 minutes I'm doing now this morning, I didn't do it before. But the cool thing is that if I need to decrease my food intake to get to the next degree of leanness, I'm not going from 50 grams of carbs or 100 grams. I'm not going from 100 grams of carbs down to 50, which is almost unbearable. I would go from 400 to 350 or 300, which is still plenty of carbs, more than enough to fuel me and to feel good. But because I'm moving so much, that would be enough to recreate it. You know what I mean? So that's what I'm doing. Just trying to move as much as possible. Now you can use different strategies if you don't have the time to do all of that. Certainly, the morning routine is something I would recommend. You don't have the bands, doesn't matter. It could be any form of physical activity done for like roughly 15 minutes. So I like to do it at half cardio and half more muscular. So if you don't have cardio equipment, you can actually just jog, or you can jog in place or whatever. And the muscular stuff, you can do body weight squats, you can do body weight lunges, you can do sit ups, you can do push ups, chin ups, plenty of things you can do even without equipment at home. Okay? So that the morning routine before the first meal, just wake up 15 minutes earlier than usual and do it. It doesn't take much time, right? Morning is something you always have more time of if you're willing to wake up a bit early. Okay. The second strategy that I would recommend is after every meal, go for a 10 minutes walk. That's from Stan Efferding. First, if you're doing that with only 3 meals per day, that's going to be 30 minutes of walking. That's roughly 2,500 steps. So it does count toward your total, and also it facilitates digestion. There's a dual benefit. Uh, you could even, like, if you're really mental about things, you could precede every meal with, let's say, like a small bout of exercise. Let's say before every meal, I'm going to be doing 50 push-ups, for example, or let's say resistance band tries to extend. It doesn't really matter, or body weight squat, just so that you are actually storing more in your muscles. That would be a very easy strategy. The other strategies is the obvious one. Always take the long way out. So let's say you're going shopping, instead of looking for the parking space the closest to the store, look for the parking space that is the furthest from the store. You have to walk more to get there. Doesn't It's not a lot of work, but if you always do that, it builds up. So the point is that try to move as much as possible. Not necessarily increase the amount of training, because training is physical activity done at a level of effort that stimulate changes. Okay, that's the difference between non-exercise activity thermogenesis, the need, or the background physical activity, and caloric expenditure from training. Training is done at an effort level that leads to changes. But because it leads to changes, it also means that it forces you to recover. It's done at a level that will make your body more tired. And if you accumulate too much of that, well, you're going to just go downward and downward and downward. However, the NEAT, the non-exercise physical activity thermogenesis, is not done at a level that will create that significant amount of fatigue. So you can add a large amount without impacting your training, without impacting your quality of life, and so on and so forth. Okay, so that would be my recommendation. Shoot for moving as much as possible. And it's not just walking, right? It can be chores. It could be cleaning the house. It could be mowing the lawn. It could be shuffling snow. Anything done with your body counts toward that total of moving more. Is it true that post-training, being more insulin sensitive and consuming fast digesting carbs like sugar, uh, olive cyclic dextrin, it's cyclic dextrin, not dextrin, is more effective compared to slow digesting carb? Thanks in advance. Um, Mixed feeling about that. Okay, I do believe that replenishing glycogen stores after a workout is very important. I do believe that there are some factors contributing to making you more insulin sensitive after a workout. First, if you just used up glycogen from your workout, you have created space in the muscle. Like, yes, insulin sensitivity is both simple and complex. There are complex factors that influence insulin sensitivity, like inflammation, like cortisol, stuff like that. Very, very complex mechanism, but there's also some simple ones. The simplest one is the more room available to store sugar or glucose you have in your muscles, the more those muscles are sensitive to insulin. Being insulin sensitive, what does that mean? It means that you need less insulin to get the job done. And the job is storing nutrients inside the muscle or clearing out the nutrients from the bloodstream, right? Uh, I'm going to give you an analogy. Let's say you are traveling in a plane, and it's one of those like small regional jets, and you have that big carry-on that you want to put in the overhead bin, right? It's and if you've been in a regional jet, you know that the overhead bin is freaking small. It's like literally the same, almost the same size as the compartment in your car, right? So you have to push and tug and turn and twist, and you're pushing again, then you take a big swing, and finally it goes in. But what it did is required a lot of effort to be able to store it because you have very little storage room. Now, if you go on those big first class planes cross Atlantic, and the overhead bin is freaking huge. The same carry-on, very easy to put in. Okay? That's insulin sensitivity from a mechanical standpoint. The more room there is, the easier it is to put the nutrients at the muscle, the less insulin or effort you need to get the job done. So if you're training, well, you are if you're resistance training or if you are doing hard conditioning, you are creating some space in the muscle you work because you are using glycogen for fuel. By creating more space, it's going to be easier to store those nutrients. Okay, so that's a given. There's also when you do hypertrophy work, you have what's called a glute or activation, which facilitate transport of glucose or carbs into the muscle. Okay? So in that sense, fast carbs would likely be, I wouldn't say necessarily a better choice, but not as bad. How can I frame that? Normally speaking, using simple sugars throughout the day would be a bad thing because it would spike insulin too much, coming with the risk of creating insulin resistance. Okay? One of the things that will create insulin resistance is if you constantly bombard the insulin receptors with lots of insulin. The more insulin you release, the longer it stays up, the more likely you are to create insulin resistance at the receptor level. If you are producing just a small amount of insulin, there's less risk of creating that resistance. Now, if you are taking in those very high glycemic simple sugars in your normal situation, you're gonna have a pretty big insulin peak, will be sustained for a long time. Higher risk of, well, first you're gonna have higher risk of insulin resistance. But if you take that same simple sugar after a workout, it is likely not gonna have that same insulin spike. First, because as you mentioned, you are more insulin sensitive, but also for hormonal factors like the fact that um, adrenaline is high after a workout could actually decrease insulin production. It's more so that having those fast carbs immediately after the workout don't have the same side effects or potential side effects that they could have at other places during the day. There's the argument that a simple sugar will be stored faster, replenishing muscle glycogen faster, initiating recovery faster. And studies have certainly shown that, but after the 24-hour mark, the same amount of carbs should lead to the same level of glycogen replenishment. So you could go either way. Right? I would, when it comes to stuff like ibuprofen, cyclodextrin, or I prefer to have them prior to the workout or during the workout. That actually protects muscle glycogen because I'm going to use that carb for fuel first. So I don't have the same need to replenish it afterwards. So that's what I personally prefer to do. What body fat percentage do you think would be a good target to maintain? I have no freaking idea because it's an individual thing. I'm give you an example. If someone is 25% body fat, okay, which is not as high as it seems. It's certainly high, but if you look at modern society, I would say that most people, men and female, are right around that number. Well, if you're 25% and you diet hard and you go down to 10%, okay, it's going to be much harder for you to maintain that 10% than if someone is 12% normally and diet down to 10%. Okay. The further away you are from your natural set point, your set point being the body fat level you naturally gravitate toward, where you spend most of your life at. Okay? And you can change that set point if you spend a lot of time at a certain level of body fat. So if through effort dieting, physical training, you are able to maintain 10% body fat, well, eventually maintaining a 10% body fat would be very easy because it becomes a new set point. But if you're 25% and you go down to 10%, maintaining that 10% is likely going to require effort and it might feel not super fun, okay, until you readjust. So the answer is the further away you are from what is your body accept as its natural state, the harder it is to maintain that level. So that's why it's important when you're losing fat to have what I would call, some people call it maintenance period. I would prefer to see them as, let's just say that, let's call them plasticifying phases or reprogramming phases, like periods where you're not actively trying to get leaner, but you're not trying to gain any weight. So you spend a certain amount of time at a level of fat, a certain level of fat, to rechange your to change your set points. For example, let's say you're 25%, you were able to get down to 10%. Now, sustaining 10% is likely not going to happen because it's going to be because you just to get from 25 to 10, lots of hard work, deprivation. You might have had some metabolic adaptations, but certainly you can probably maintain 12 to 13%. We're going to try to maintain that 12 and 13% for as long as possible. Okay. So that eventually maintaining 12, 13% becomes your new set point. So it doesn't require any effort. Now you can diet down to 8%, and then you're going to maintain 10%. See what I mean? So if you're trying right now, I want to go at 10 and maintain 10, that might not happen. But over time, that's something that can happen. Like, I'm going to use myself as an example. When I was younger, even though I was training, I was very strong for me. I mean, I was competing weightlifting. I was like 225 pounds, but I had like 18, 20% body fat. I was squatting 600. I was bench pressing 400. I was snatching 315, clean and jerking 375 or 365 rather. I was cleaning 375. So I was pretty strong. not to muscle, but 20% body fat. And over the course of many years, of many, I would lose fat, regain some. Now, my natural set point, instead of being 20, it's close to, let's say, 11, 12. So 12% body fat, I can maintain that by just being me. It's like literally I'm there without zero effort. And now getting to 8% is pretty easy. So my goal now is to make 10% my set point. See what I mean? But yeah, I've done that through the course of a longer period of time. So if you try to right now stay as lean as possible, that might not always be doable. Happy Thanksgiving. Well, I'm in Canada. Thanksgiving is not in November for us, but thank you. Coach, I can squat 405 as my 3RM, but I struggle with 225 on a leg press. So weird leg press. Someone said my posterior strength is stronger than quad. That is certainly something possible. What can I do to address this? Instead of doing back squat, do front squat with heels elevated. Or you know what? You suck at leg press, well, do a leg press. That's the thing with exercises. They are oftentimes both the diagnostic and the solution. An exercise where you should be stronger based on what our lifts are moving, but it's weak, that pretty much indicates or tells me that becoming stronger on that lift will fix the problem. But if you want to not want, I would do leg press or I would do back squat because those would be more quad dominant. But if you want to keep squatting, and you should probably should come because understand what your goals are, you should probably move toward a front loaded squat. Yeah, I've also seen people leg press 10 plates but can squat 2 plates barbell. Well, first, uh, what was the range on the 10 plates on leg press? If they can't squat 2 plates, they should have leg strength. Anyway, um, sometimes they will shorten the range of motion. If you look at the knee angle when they're leg pressing and the knee angle when they're squatting, what's the difference? A lot of the time, people think they're doing a full range on leg press, but really they are barely reaching a 90 degrees knee angle, which would be closer to a half squat than a full squat. It's also the fact that the leg press has no lower back involvement. So if someone is weak on the back squat, it could actually be that their lower back is too weak to sustain the load or the core. It could also be a technical issue, or just the fact that they might be afraid of putting weight on their back when squatting. I've seen plenty of people be limited on their squatting strength more because of anxiety or fear than actual lack of strength. Hey, coach, does surge workout fuel repair muscle tissue since it does have an EA profile? Well, it does have leucine. So in that regard, leucine is the amino acid that increases mTOR activation the most. So it increases protein synthesis, and of course, increasing protein synthesis is the mechanism by which muscle is being repaired. It does not, however, provide all the blocks needed to repair such tissue. So it could initiate the process, but if you don't have another protein source close to that intake of surgery workout fuel, either uh, an hour or so prior or as a solid meal close to the workout fuel, then you might not have all the building blocks to use the machinery you started with the leucine. Personally, if I want to make the surgery workout fuel more complete in that regard, I will mix it with Mag10. Why Turkey when Xmas is just 1 month away? Dude, you preaching to the choir. And as I mentioned, I live in Canada. Thanksgiving for us is in spring. It's not in November. So it is what it is. Continuing with the body fat percentage or body fat conversation, can someone who is 25% go down to 14% and stay there and be new homeostasis body fat in their 30s? Sure. Again, 14% is not that far off from 25. 14% is pretty sustainable. And again, it also depends on how you got there. If you got from 25 to 14 through a huge reduction in food, it will be very hard to maintain that 14% because you're going to have all kinds of mechanism triggered that will force you to eat more and also decrease your metabolic rate. If you reach that 14% through a very small or moderate decrease in food intake, but an increase in physical activity, yes, it's absolutely very easy to maintain. We're not in the danger zone yet. All right, guys, up to the hour and 5 minutes. I appreciated your questions today. I felt it was one of our best sessions, much more variation in the questions. I like that. Just so that you know, next week we're going to get back to our regularly scheduled time of 11 a.m. Eastern time. Again, today was just because of the strike with the teachers. So we planned activities with the kids. But next week, I'm going to be back at 11 as usual. So thank you for being here, and you guys have a great week.